Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by our esteemed faculty member, Andrea Garrett. So, thank you so much for coming back on the show. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. I'm getting through that Mars pose Uranus. It's been a wild ride, but part of being an astrologer is kind of watching things from the top down and be like, wow, in this episode, things were just nuts. And that's been fun.
That's a great point. With the Mars-Uranus opposition, I was just like, I'm staying indoors for a few days. So, if anyone watched our previous episode, we talked about dealing with the malefics. And today, Andrea, we're talking about dealing with the benefics, Venus, and Jupiter issues. And you've put together a great presentation. So, let's dive in.
All right, wonderful. So, as a lot of you know, my specialty in astrology is remedies and remedy theories. So, today in the last video, we looked at what to do with Mars and Saturn as far as what are the problems associated with them, and then what are the remedies for them. Today, we're dealing with the benefics. Now, this is kind of an interesting topic because if a benefic, you think of the word beneficial or beneficent or things like that. And benefics are largely very good. I mean, we love things like love and joy, and which are Venus and Jupiter issues, or not issues, but themes. And so, do they really need remedies? And I think we'll see today that sometimes they really do. And in that case, we will. So let's start with Venus. First of all, we have to look at, what does Venus bring? It's a sweetening vibration, loving, creationary, beauty bringing, communal, connective, softening, pleasure bringing, impassioning, uplifting, and it kind of pulses or it's like undulating. So it's like obviously all of these are great things in life. Like to be sweet and loving is something that we like. What does Venus need? It needs to commune, to connect, bond, be appealing, exchange sweetness, and emit beauty. It's interesting. Let's go back in time to the Hellenistic astrologers and we look at something called planetary sect, which I would translate as classification. That word in Greek means class. So, so like there's the sun class of planets or the day class, and then there's the night class of planets. And in nocturnal sect, they say that the moon, Venus, and Mars work together to deal with our emotional needs. So the moon is the emotional needs, and Venus pulls things closer to us, and then Mars pushes them away. Like if you look at a baby and it has like Venus going over the moon, it will be like eating everything you give to it. And then if it has Mars going over the moon, it's like pushing food away and throwing it on the floor and things like that. So Venus is actually what we need in order to commune or connect, to bond. We need to be able to bond in order to live, or and in order to do this, people do all the kinds of things. They exchange sweetness, words of affirmation. I guess you could look at the five love languages of like there's like gift giving, words of affirmation, all those things. I mean, these are like love language things that we do on Venus transits. People who represent Venus, musicians, artists, socialites, people who just love to socialize, like just constantly bonding with people, beauticians, designers, activity coordinators, candy makers, singers, bakers, lovers. I mean, who doesn't love all these people? I mean, Callum, do you see any problem with Venus people?
Yeah, and I like how you've got here. You often find many musicians and artists with a heavy Venus emphasis in their chart, whether it be their chart ruler. You see musicians with Venus Mercury connections. Outer planets, there's often, I find, a Neptune quality with really creative artists. But I like how you brought up sect as well. So it seems even more prominent in those of the charts with a nocturnal sect, having that Venus in sect. And of course, you've got the moon as the sect light. So yeah, musicians, artists, designers, especially those ones with the nocturnal charts who tend to be, in my experience, a bit more creative at night. When the sun goes down and those creative energies flow, these people tend to, I don't know, tend to, in my experience, not enjoy the light of the day too much and maybe get a bit drained out when working or creating the day, but they come out that nocturnal set at night to create.
Yeah, because I think it helps you understand like why do we even need Venus? Why do we need to bond? It's funny with the Mars Uranus opposition that happened. I know this seems like a non sequitur, but we probably loosened a lot of bonds. Mars cuts things, and it's like we actually need to bond, and then sometimes we need to cut bonds, right? But it's like we have to bond in order to really enjoy life. Let's look at some of the pictures here so that we see the top left. This guy is making this mural, and when we drive by murals and we look at things, we're like, oh my God, that is amazing. Like, and some people think that you can live without the arts, but when they do, cut arts funding in schools, people literally die inside.
It's such a
Um,
great point, and it seems to be prevalent now in Western societies where the first things to get cut when the economy turns down is the arts. And I like how you've got at the top, what does Venus energy feel like? And again, as we get into charts, like we've just seen now with the transits going from a cardinal air Venus quality to a fixed water, which has a very different flavor. I know we could probably talk about dignities later on, but for each flavor of the individual energy is going to be really modified by the element, mode, and polarity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and if we look at Venus like in at home in Taurus, like these people wear a lot of makeup. Like I knew a drag queen, she had a Venus Mars conjunction in Taurus and like always making this big huge makeup and like, and so like makeup is very Venusian and if we look at this woman on the bottom right, models are very Venusian where you look at them and you're just like, "Oh, I would love to be near that person." I mean, like Venus makes us want to be close to people, if we look at the people holding hands down below, that's definitely a Venus feeling of like, and what's this feel like? We all, a lot of us have partners and do we feel Venusian all the time? Yes and no. I mean, like, yeah, you love your partner, but there you have a Venus transit, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I just love you so much. Like, I love you. Like, you know what I mean? And like, you just start noticing like how much you love them. That's very Venus energy. Then the cupcakes on the bottom right. Okay, I'm gonna say something. You told me that you like that I'm blunt and so I'm gonna say something kind of controversial, which is that I believe in giving kids sugar. And the reason is that Venus, if we see the cupcakes on the bottom right, it is the sweetness in life. And people always think sugar makes kids freak out, but what I believe is it's transits making the kids freak out or chi. Like, they're in a Mars transit, they're freaking out. It's not the sugar they ate. But what the sugar does is it makes them feel that life is worth living and that life is good. And so sometimes, parents reward kids with sugar and they get critiqued for that. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but the point is like I just if they're in a Venus transit and they want to eat some sugar, I'm like, here you go, honey. Life is sweet. Like life is good. But because without Venus, we actually get really sad because we do a lot of hard things in a day, and then if you look at the top right, there's the musicians, and musicians are always like Venus and Libra is very musical, and Venus is at home there, but it's very relational Venus. So a lot of musicians have Venus and Libra because they like to commune and make art together and things like that. Any comments or questions? I'm not trying to control you. I know you're actually in charge, so feel free to
No,
speak.
I love Andrea. I love your style. But speaking to your point, and it's quite an interesting point about, giving kids sugar or those treats. And I'm going to speak from a Venus and Capricorn and say I enjoy the sweetness of Venus in moderation. So when my son comes in and we just had Halloween, then of course we're going to have a night of candy and sugar. That's just how it's going to be. Because again, with that Venus, we need to be uplifted in life. We need that sweetness. But again, this might speak to the broader question, which we're going to talk about today, which is Venus and Jupiter issues. And of course, anything that is too much of a good time or too much of a good thing becomes a negative. So I think that speaks to that's just my Venus in Capricorn, Saturn ruled, being a bit more moderate.
Well, and you're actually right. So I have Venus in Libra square Jupiter in Cancer. I have a problematic Venus, which is like too much of a good thing, right? Where I'm just like, eat the sugar, like wear all the beads, like I'm just like gaudy and like, it's like it's like I think you're absolutely correct that is why we need remedy for I like someone remedy me, please. I'm giving the kids sugar, you know what I mean? Like so yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's look at what are some problematic presentations of Venus. Expressing romantic love in a way that causes sorrow. So, for example, now you'll see a lot in these lists of just like sometimes it's coldness, sometimes it's, like a Venus square Jupiter can be like having multiple loves or like being essentially polyamorous, which isn't itself a problem if you're honest about it. But if you act like you're monogamous and then you have this Venus square Jupiter that keeps having manias and you keep growing other love relationships, that would be problematic. You see what I mean? Other ways to express love, if you had a Venus square Mars, that those people go into some manias where they get like really aggressive in love all of a sudden. And so they'll be in partnership and then all of a sudden have one of these Jupiter hit that they have a mania and they like are really aggressively falling in love with someone else or like so I think we do have to look at Venus when connection or bonding becomes problematic, that is a Venus issue. And then we see being cold in one's expression of love. I have a friend who's a Venus Saturn conjunction, and he's always kind of cutting people off and being really reserved in love. And in some ways that can be a withholding or like, that the problem there is that you're not giving that bonding, you're not bonding and receiving bonding, you're just being a little bit not bonding enough. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. Feeling as if there's no sweetness in life. I mean, that would be if you have Venus and Capricorn conjunct Saturn. Um, like that would be savagely like we never eat candy. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, overindulgence in sweetness life. This one you brought up. Okay, I'll tell you about a case I had. It was a Moon Venus Jupiter conjunction in Taurus. Can you imagine that Moon Venus conjunction in Taurus? So Venus is at home in Taurus, the moon's exalted there, and then Jupiter's on it. In this case, we had a bulimic, and the person, because Taurus is all in the ear, nose, and throat, and so they would have transits to this Moon, Jupiter, Venus, eat, 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 eat. It's like can't get enough. The sweetness receptors in the ear, nose, and throat were just going haywire, and so it's like that's an example of overindulgence where then the body has to then purge it and so that we would maybe want a remedy because it needs temperance of some kind or some kind of, or you could just let it happen. But from a harm reduction perspective, like that eats away at the teeth lining and it's not good to do that.
That example, I really enjoy that example because what it's emphasizing is yes, we're talking about dignities, but just because, people often look at their charts and will panic if they see a lot of planets in detriment or fall, etc. But you're bringing an example there of a Venus at home, an exalted moon, and Jupiter conjunction. So, on the face value, dignified planet, but how that can become unskilled when it's been done too much or too much sweetness is taken, and how it can have detrimental effects. So again, we can talk about dignities, but on face value, it doesn't always mean positive or negative. It just depends on the context for the individual.
Beautiful. What the ancients knew is they said that a planet in its own signs can produce what it promises. That, people always think dignified means good. Do you really want a dignified Mars? Like, I don't know. I would take a weak Mars personally. So it's like, a dignified Venus with the moon, it's like it's a little too strong. Actually, it's producing what Venus promises, which is eating sweets. And as your Venus and Capricorn has taught us, like temperance in that it could be much healthier. Because here with we get Taurus actually rules the thyroid and a lot of diabetes. I think that's a thyroid. I'm not a doctor, so maybe I'm wrong here. But if or people that have a slow thyroid, they can gain weight of like there's something about like that Taurus and eating and sweets and thyroid and like it's a whole cluster of beauty and now we could look at it from the more just accepting perspective, like that every chart is beautiful and, being bulimic is just that chart's way of being like, eat, love, be merry, but like, let's actually jump to a remedy for that one. What I definitely don't do as a remedy person is say, like, you need to calm down and accept that life is actually rigid. Like, because their receptor, like how they're built is they get all of this joy from their ear, nose, and throat. So what I did with that person was give them a bunch of expressions that were sweet in the ear, nose, and throat that weren't eating. So and we did like flower arranging because they can smell the flowers and look at the colors. Making perfume, they can smell the perfume and it gives them something to fidget with, because a lot of it's like using your chi to like fidget, right? So it's like we're making perfumes, we're making flower arrangements where you can put flowers all over the table and like binge on flowers. Do you feel like that would be a good remedy for that?
I think that's such a beautiful remedy because you're not restricting the native in terms of your advice. You're still using those qualities of what those planets want. And again, if they're in the home sign, the expression of those planets, but moving away from something that can be, if done too much, can be detrimental to the health and bringing in things like flowers. You still get the, I'm sure with fixed earth, it's the tangible qualities and the smells. So you're converting it from one pleasure to another, but one that isn't as harmful to the natives. So I think that's a beautiful remedy. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the word harm because, like, I think harm reduction is a lot of what we're doing. Is like we're not judging. We're like, yeah, you are just popping in those areas, but like also let's not like lose a teeth over it, you know. And we don't judge it. And also makeup. That person could be a makeup artist and having like mannequins and constantly be doing makeup. And it's like what we do see with the Jupiter Venus is a lot of sweetness, a lot of art. We have to teach the person. Tattoo artists make art constantly all day every day. It's okay to make art constantly, and I think, can you binge on art? Is it would be, but then maybe they spend too much on art supplies, and that's a Venus Jupiter thing, is like overspending. And like, so it could be that if we give them 20 remedies or 20 outlets for their Venus Jupiter, that all those together is enough. So being overly effusive or obsequious, this would be like a person who has like a Mercury Venus conjunction, and they're like it's everyone they meet, like, "You're so amazing, Callum." Like, I just, like it's just like constantly like being like overly sweet. Like, wasn't that kind of uncomfortable when I said that? It's like being overly like it's like giving the gifts of words of affection to people you shouldn't be. Like, you know what I mean? Sorry, I did that for the teaching, but yeah, but it's like if someone's like abusing you and you're like, "But you're so amazing." It's like that's an issue, kind of thing. Eating large amounts of refined sugar, obviously, hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, those sugar issues, blood sugar problems, alcohol and sugar cravings. This is a big one for me. People always think addiction is like 12th house or Neptune. But in certain people, we get a Venus, like a Venus Jupiter conjunction, and they are party animals. They drink and drink. Once they start drinking, they don't stop drinking, or, alcoholic beverages are sweet a lot of times, and so if we look here on the slides, this we have alcohol on the bottom right. Those are all sugars, actually. And there we really want to do harm reduction because people drink and drive, or they drink and then do things they don't want to do. And okay, with my Venus square Jupiter, I'll use myself as an example. I don't allow myself to use any substances that could hurt me because I do have a Venus square Jupiter. And I I I love to party, and so now I wake up and I party on Facebook. I'm like, "Hey, everyone, what's up with your transits?" And I find ways to hyper bond that are healthy for the community at large. And I do think I still have a beverage problem. Like, I actually have 2 beverages with me today. I have my habanero latte and my coffee, and I often have a 3rd beverage, but it's like I have to have all my beverages because I'm just like, "Everything's awesome," like, kind of thing. And so I think we can teach people with Venus issues to really enjoy life healthily. It takes some doing, though.
I love that example. Venus, I like this. Jupiter, I need more of this. This is literally the literal example you just shown with your 2 cups.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, if you look at the bottom right, we have this woman. She's got her hamburger, but it's like so big. That's like a Venus Jupiter problem. I like this, like, give me more of it, kind of thing. And then the lady on the top right, she's like more of a Venus Saturn issue, which is she's just like not. She doesn't look like she wants to bond with us. She looks very inward and kind of thing. So here's some physical remedies for Venus. Eating molecularly whole sugars like fruits, dates, maple syrup, molasses, or raw honey. So if we're going to eat a lot of sugar, don't eat refined sugar, eat whole sugar that has nutrients in it. You can balance. No, these are physical remedies. You might saying, well, these don't cover the emotional nature of it, but these are just physical things. Balancing the blood sugar through a sustained diet with good fats, protein, things like that. And then reading books such as The Low Blood Sugar Solution or Blood Sugar for Dummies, things like that. Like, you can become an expert in sugar if you have a very strong Venus. And as you see, dates on the bottom right they have a lot of nutrients in them. So you're not just getting sugar, but you still get the sweetness of life. Molasses is a similar case. And then the vegetables kind of alkalize they're like an antidote to all the sugar, right? Like, in some ways we have to give people stuff that where they can ride the high of their chart. So it's like, if you want all the sugar here, eat a bunch of dates, but also here's some vegetables to counteract that. Any comments there?
Oh, this is very interesting. I know nothing about food and I can't cook, so I'm just listening to you.
Okay. All right, here's the emotional remedies for Venus. Socializing. People always think that drinking is the party, but if you actually analyze a party, it's people and an activity. It's like smelling slime is like a party, or whatever, playing a game or whatever it is. It's socializing and being with people and bonding is the thing. Listening to music, going to fancy restaurants. It's like you can eat very healthy food on a Venus transit as long as you're like enjoying the sweeter things in life, which is this fancy artisanal restaurant, beautifying the self with clothing and makeup. If you look at this woman on the bottom right and see how she's beautified with her crown and her extreme makeup, um, making yourself this object that people want to be close to and adore. Same with the woman on the right, the top right. She's got all of her jewelry. Like if you look at, what makes women beautiful or people beautiful, especially in older age, because you have Venus even in older age, is jewels and like bedazzling yourself. I mean, women with their big diamonds and their, and like in weddings, like in Native American weddings, they make this huge collar of beads for the wife, and it's like that's what makes them beautiful is the art on them. It's not like your natural beauty. It's like all that stuff, like even wearing a ring like this. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying like that jewels and diamonds and all those kinds of things, or just like all of that beautifying the self definitely is a Venus thing. Um, Doting on yourself, wearing fancy jewelry, connecting with people, smelling scents and unguents are like oils and things like that. Smiling and laughing, arranging flowers, dancing, listening to music. So if you see this girl in the bottom middle, she's listening to music. She's totally having the Venus there. Um, one of the ways that I really relax is I always listen to my headphones and I bead, and that's making art, and I'm watching the art emerge, and I'm also got the music on. They say if you do like, well, I say this, if you do three things that you love at once, you're in heaven. So it's like do three things you love at the same time. Um, the woman on the bottom left is in a fancy restaurant, just enjoying being taken care of, and then the kid on the top left is just smiling. So, any thoughts there, Callum?
Yeah, I love this take on the emotional remedies for Venus and just take advantage of Venus when it's working well for you. I'm a Libra rising, so recently you've just had Venus go over all of our Libra rising ascendant people. So I just took advantage, go and have a spa day. I've got no problem with that. Go and getting pampered, go out and take advantage. If that Venus is transiting through the seventh, go off to a nice restaurant and go out with a partner, things of this nature. So watching the transit, really diving into the essential nature of your own Venus and your own natal chart. Obviously, as we all know, what house it's in, the houses it's ruling, what connections it's making with other planets, etc. But diving in, and especially when you get into your element mode and polarity of your own Venus, what you really like to enjoy, and take advantage of that, and have these emotional remedies and emotional outlets for what your Venus really wants. Andrea, I didn't even ask you. I'm curious to know your Venus, if you don't mind sharing.
My Venus is in Libra in the fifth house, square
Oh, you
Jupiter.
said Libra. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, I have I'm the most wild Venus. I think if we took that bulimia example, it might take like working in a bakery where they're making food for tons of people. That might and making the sweetness, go around the world or whatever. I think we need permission to be extremely Venusian in non-pathological ways. It's like it's okay to wear extreme makeup, once a week, because then my Venus Jupiter gets hit once a week. Like I dress up like a clown, like whatever it is. You like it's okay to be wildly beautiful often, or you don't have to eat a bunch of sugar. You can, adorn yourself or whatever. I think we need permission to be very Venusian sometimes,
I
healthily.
totally agree with that. And then giving yourself permission, even if your desires and your Venus qualities aren't what, maybe what society frowns on. I remember growing up, they would call us in England, they called us moshers. We were the heavy metal group with what you've got on now, with all the black, the heavy boots, the heavy metal, things like that. So even if it's not largely enjoyed by society, do your own thing, do your Venus thing, and don't worry what anybody else thinks, is my advice.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah. And look at hyper Venusian people like, performers, musicians, makeup artists, models, it's like
Mm.
They all exist for a reason, and it's okay. You can be hyper Venusian and be very healthy, kind of thing. Okay, let's keep cooking on Jupiter here. So Jupiter vibrations are a little bit different. They're opening, joy-filling, growing, uplifting, faith-bringing, optimistic, expansive. People need to feel lucky and glorious with Jupiter. Okay, so here's an example. Okay, so you know how like when you're pinching pennies, you're like, "Oh, I can't afford this, I can't afford that." And then you'll have a Jupiter transit and be like, "You know what? It's fine. I'm getting the barbecue grill or whatever." It's like it's that feeling of being like open and optimistic, like everything will be fine. I'm getting the girl. Yeah, that's Jupiter feeling. It always makes me think of people having kids. Like if you actually looked at creating another human being and you were like, oh, I'm gonna have to support them financially and all these things. Like that's a very Saturn look at it, and then a very Jupiter look at it is like, it'll be fine. Everything will work out. Let's have a kid. You know what I mean? And like this is why I feel like Jupiter is more associated with children than like Saturn, for example, because it takes a lot of joy and faith to do such a thing, kind of thing. Um, so taking chances is very Jupiter, to feel like everything's going to be all right, be jolly and feel limitless. So if we look at some of the pictures here, this guy on the top left is like busking. He's like a comedian busking on the sidewalk. And a lot of comedians are very Jupiterian and they're just like cracking up, like the weirdest things happen, they just crack up. And so like that's comedy is very Jupiter. These dogs on the bottom right are just jollily running through the wilderness, like just with their tongues wagging. It's like that's Jupiter energy of just like this is awesome, kind of thing. On the top right, I can't see one of my pictures there, but I can see the gambling. Like, do you associate gambling with Jupiter?
I think if you're having a nice transit, you can give it a go. But yeah, maybe connection, maybe, with the financial axis in the chart. Maybe you've mentioned it before, maybe the overspenders or the ones who, and again, if we're talking about the shadow side of the Jupiter, is overspending or gambling or taking too much risk where you end up on your arse. So I think this is a good picture for
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely since we're talking about remedies for Jupiter, it's like there are professional gamblers. They might have like Jupiter trine the sun or Mercury where they take a perfect amount of risk and they feel, perfectly limitless. And so but I think if we get like Jupiter square Uranus in the natal chart, or like here we get like people who like all of a sudden take big risks out of nowhere and they're gambling hundreds of thousands of dollars or something like that we might need to remedy, you know um or Jupiter squares. I mean, I love the benefics, but a Jupiter square can bring too much of a thing. Like here's an example: people who have Mars Jupiter, they are often extreme athletes. When they're exercising they feel very buoyant and optimistic, but then they might hurt themselves training for a marathon. That's an example of Mars Jupiter. Like you're a little bit too, you took on too much, kind of
Quite
thing.
interesting. Of course, Jupiter is less personal than Venus being a personal planet. And if anybody is watching here who's a teacher, you'll often find these groups of kids that come up through the years where you might have, groups of kids where, let's just give an example, mutable fire, and they're taking more risks and they're taking more action. They may be bouncing off the walls where you might get another year where you're like, oh, these are really a bit more restrained and chilled out, but they might have, operate with that Jupiter in a different way. So a lot of teachers out there will know these Jupiter blocks of groups of people with the classes year by year, which is quite interesting to note.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Yeah, if you notice just to keep moving forward there, if you notice the woman with the candle and the cross, having faith is very Jupiter. In religious theory, let's say you're trying to manifest something, but it's not happening right now. You're supposed to have faith and be like, this will happen. Like I am, and it's like the mustard seed parable of like, I'm just have this tiny mustard seed that's gonna, I have faith that it will grow into a big tree, or, so I think like in some ways people who have like Jupiter trine moon, for example, have extreme amounts of faith where they say, like they're very whatever happens they emotionally are very optimistic and things like that. So I think at its best, Jupiter does allow us to really believe that everything will be okay. And so and then traveling is the kind of bottom right thing, is like, growth opportunities is what I would say with Jupiter is, Jupiter said to grow whatever it goes over, like by transit. And, it's like travel is one way that people grow, but you can grow in any way. If you're a crocheter, Jupiter's going through Cancer and Jupiter goes over your Cancer planets, you can grow by taking on the optimism to take on a new pattern that's really, so the optimism and growth of Jupiter are one of the most beautiful things about it. I think sometimes we get overgrowth. It would be like bushes, like blackberry, you know, vines overgrow, and then you have to trim them back, and overgrowth can be an issue. Mercury square Jupiter people are really interesting because they go through these like manias, I would say, when something hits their square, where they have to learn like a million things, and like I have to learn this and I have to learn that, and I got to read like 10 books. They get like 10 books, from the bookstore at once and can only read like one paragraph, so that's an overabundance of excitement about learning, which I guess a remedy for that would be like you should go to the library and not the bookstore, because you don't have to pay for those 10 books. You can just get them and then take them back. We get into like simple remedies like that, but you see how Jupiter can be kind of problematic in its spurts and fits and starts and things like that.
It's a good point, and it goes back to the old adage again of too much of a good thing, can be an issue. Give an example. This is not always the case, but more often than not, and I wonder if any studies have been done on this, but take a natal chart with Jupiter in the first, for example. These people may struggle with weight to a certain degree, or if there's a transit coming over your first house, particularly your ascendant, those might be some issues. I can only think of, the likes of the great Robert Hand, and he's talked about this before. He's got this wonderfully exalted Jupiter in the first house. It trines the midheaven. He's really widely regarded, obviously, in the astrological community, but he always talked about, yeah, I'm a heavier set guy. Now, that's not for every Jupiter in the first house, and that's not to say anybody who doesn't have it is not going to have weight issues. But again, it just speaks to your point of overabundance or the ability to try and rein things in, which is not, can often not be done with a Jupiter that is often wanting to keep expanding and keep moving out.
I love that example because okay, so there's actually studies that have been done that like chubby people are much happier. And like it's true because there's the eat and be merry attitude that makes them chubby. And astrologically we would say, and this is where like, a linear Virgoic look at the food pyramid and like says like everyone who's chubby is unhealthy. But if you have a good Jupiter, your chakras are actually spinning quite nicely, and you're actually very healthy chakrically. So it's like, I think is being big an issue only if we have a serious harm reduction thing that we need to do, like we now have diabetes or something, like that's where the nice Jupiter and Capricorn. I'm going back to your Venus and Capricorn, but like people could like, or maybe a nice Saturn person could rein in the Jupiter. I do think, if we had a kid with an excessive Jupiter, we might have to be very Saturnian on them. Um, yeah, I mean, let's get to the remedies for these things. So, like problematic presentations of Jupiter, being overly optimistic, making plans that can't be kept, overspending, inviting too many people over for a party, overestimating how many resources are available, overspending money is a big one. Over opportunism, not being able to focus, problems with the liver, or lack of joy, like Jupiter Saturn people, like when they have a Jupiter Saturn conjunction, they can often feel that their Jupiter is being, squashed. No, I think overestimating how many resources available. This one's a little bit interesting for me because I'm more of a mega manifestation person where I believe if you have a square to Jupiter, you're supposed to like grow in these kind of surges. And, we spend money in order, people say money can't make you happy, but it sure can help develop you. Like an artist without art supplies can only make a certain level of art, for example. So when people have Jupiter transits and they go shopping, one harm reduction we do is to have them shop at cheaper stores, like a thrift store. Like you can still develop yourself in this arena, but you can go shopping, but you don't have to spend tons of money, to do that. I think development is the issue, is the call of Jupiter. It's not necessarily spending, kind of thing. But people will spend on credit. If you see the credit card on the top right, they'll spend on credit because they got to develop themselves now. Like, I got to book that trip now. And it's actually the soul saying, I need this thing now. And so we have to figure with Jupiter how to get the thing they're trying to grow into without the problems. Like I said, spending, like, if you need to go on a trip, can you go on a very cheap trip versus a really expensive trip, and kind of thing. If you're going to go gambling, you really want to do that, gamble on the 10% machine and not hundreds of thousands of dollars, um, that kind of thing. But see
These are
this part.
great. These are great representations of a problematic Jupiter. Of course, you're talking about overspending. If we compare it to the likes of the greater malefic Saturn, this is, and Marcus Patchett puts this really well. He talks about the malefics being what you pay up front. If you go to the gym, you're using the Mars, you're paying up front, you get the rewards later. Saturn, put in the hard work, you eventually get the rewards. But the problematic part of the Jupiter and to some degree the Venus is, like you said with the credit card, it's a lack of a delay of delayed gratification, which Saturn will bring. Jupiter is like, no, I need this now, and as you said, I want to self-develop as fast as possible. My favorite chart example for an overactive Jupiter was Mozart, who had Jupiter in his second house. And he didn't have a lot of Earth in his chart either, but he was notorious for just overspending. He earned a lot through what he did, but he nearly went bankrupt and in a lot of debt because he just couldn't help himself by being over opulent and overspending with that Jupiter in the second. But I think these are great examples.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, like if just to keep moving, like if you look at this party on the bottom, it's like if you invite that many people to your party, you might need, a security guard or something like that. Um, and then the dog on the top left is like that's a problematic Jupiter where the dog doesn't really look like it has a lot of joy like the other dogs. There's something lacking in joy. And then we have the liver on the bottom right. Okay. Physical remedies for Jupiter, if we have like liver issues or something like that, well, fish oil is on the top left, and avocados are on the top bottom left, which are it's like good fats because they associate fat with Jupiter, like you were saying, heavy set people, fat people. We'll spell it with a PH today, fat people. I'm actually a body positivist, and I love all bodies because people look like their charts. Okay, and if God wouldn't have wanted people to look like all varieties, God wouldn't have made all the charts. Okay, that's my take on that. But I will say eating good fats, like if you're gonna eat a lot of fat, eat good fats like avocados and fish oil and things like that, where you don't just want to eat lard or this similar with the Venus thing, like eat good sugars if you're gonna eat, you know, kind of thing. Going on adventures is a very healthy thing. Jovial and spiritual dancing. If you see on the bottom right, see how much faith there is in that dance. That the culture, a lot of and I guess that's a physical remedy because they're physically doing it, but that's also an emotional remedy of like getting out that feeling of just like faith and providing outlets. Liver cleansing. Okay, here let's say the person had fatty liver, and I've seen a lot of liver issues. Like, I know a guy who has a Jupiter Saturn and he has all these tumors on his liver. And, so if there is liver stuff, you can do a liver cleanse, things like that. But you kind of get it. Like, you get, if you have a Jupiter issue, take care of the liver. If you have a Venus issue, take care of the thyroid. It's like you become an expert in that organ and in fat itself, kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, this one is probably going to hit us a little better, the emotional remedies. So here's meeting new people, taking hold of opportunities, creating opportunities, giving, being grandiose. Okay, one of the things I love about chubby Jupiter people is they're always like, eat and be merry, eat my pasta. And like all the kids are over at the house eating the pasta. Whereas like the Saturn person, they're like, you can't eat that here. Whatever, it's like, who's over at that house? Like no one. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying there is that eat and be merry kind of temperament, you know. I think of like the big Italian cook, or the laughing Buddha. So bringing good cheer, being optimistic, laughing contagiously. If you look at these girls on the bottom right, they're just cracking up. That's so Jupiter. Same with the younger pair right there. Yeah, so I think, all just dying, comedy is so Jupiter, just like laughing it off, telling jokes, learning new ways to feel light and free. You know, and so if we look at the train on the top left, like traveling, getting out of town, like letting it all go, is very Jupiter, or the plane. And then the prayer on the bottom right, that's like prayer. It's like if we're stuck in a situation where we really can't let it go, then we want to like give it up to the higher power and just be like, can you help me feel light and free, so um yeah.
Yeah, I love these remedies. And do you find the advantage with working with clients and looking at the natal charts is that with natal charts, you've got the advantage of working for the native for the whole lifetime? Because, of course, a natal chart, we're looking over large periods of time. So what we were like in our early 20s is going to be very different from what we're like in our late 40s. Things of this nature. It's not rigid in a sense like, I'm not a medical astrologer, but if you're dealing with a decumbrature chart and you've got a narrow window of time to remedy, is the advantage here working with natal charts is you do have that larger swath of time.
Interesting. Yeah, I really like working with people longitudinally, for, 20 years in a row because you can say, "Oh, I remember when you had Jupiter hit your sun square Jupiter and you overspent. I remember that, 15 years ago. All right, on this Jupiter transit, let's try this." And it's like, so I think in remedy theory, people always want like an instantaneous remedy. That's kind of how we're trained with doctors. But with astrological clinicians, it's like we like to see what your spirit is really trying to do, try to work with it to let it do that with harm reduction. Like we're always kind of like trying, um, I want to use the word massaging for lack of a better word. We're like massaging the chart until we can find a way that it thrives, Um, I know that's a weird word for it, but you know what I mean, where it's that process of trying and but yeah, really we want Jupiter people to be Jupiterian, we want them to be laughing and contagiously optimistic. Here's my Jupiter and Scorpio.
There's your laughing Buddha.
Yeah,
I love
but
it.
it's this Jupiter and Scorpio where it's just like you're laughing about the dark side. No, like, but
It's a black laughing Buddha.
yes, yes, yeah, and I think wherever we have our Jupiter is it's like our joy receptor of like what brings us joy and where we can bring joy to the world, and we want to just make sure that we're not harming ourselves with overdoing that things kind of thing. All the ideas are taken from this book, Astrological Remediation, which you can find for print on Amazon, or you can email me for a PDF copy. And then if you want to find me, I'm on YouTube at Andrea Garrett's, and also Facebook is my office. So I'm always talking to people on Facebook, and it's at my name. That's all.
Absolutely wonderful. And again, Andrea, thank you so much for an enlightened conversation on some of the issues and some of the problems we can have with benefics. And again, they're not always benefic. For everybody watching, to reiterate, I'll put the links to Andrea's YouTube and all the social links in the comment and the description boxes. And lastly, Andrea, you've got a class coming up, a remediation class at Kepler College in the new year. So would you like to say a few words about that?
Sure, it's gonna be I think it starts in January and it's Sundays from 4 to 5:30 Pacific. It runs 5 weeks in a row. That class is wonderful. We go from everything from isolating a planet that needs remedy to learning gem remedies, 5 different methodologies for remedy, symbolic substitution, strategic planning, humans as remedies. Like, so we do all of that stuff. We go through the planets, the houses, so people who take that class really get a good dose of remediation, and I think not to have hubris and be on the over Jupiterian side, but I think every astrologer should learn remedy theory because it makes you a happy astrologer and you can handle pretty much anything with that under your belt.
Absolutely fantastic. So again, links for the class both in the description and comment boxes. And I will say Andrea is a wonderful musician as well. She sent me a CD where I didn't know she was playing piano and it was kick-ass. So if you've got any Tool fans out there or see some of those musically inclined, definitely go and check out her YouTube channel. You got some music there as well. So Andrea, again, thank you so much and let's talk again. in the near
Okay,
future.
Callum, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. And I really want to talk to you about teleology.
Okay, we'll get on it.
All right.
All right,
Okay.
cheers. Thank you, Andrea, and goodbye, everyone. We'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.